The most quoted opening sentence in the English language is not a flourish. It is a warning. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. We recite it as if it were a clever paradox, a bit of Victorian wordplay to be admired and set aside. But Dickens did not write those words to be beautiful. He wrote them to tell you, before a single character appears, exactly how his book works and exactly what it fears. That sentence is a machine. And by the end of tonight, you will never read a tale of two cities as a romance again. Because that is how it is usually sold to us. A love triangle. A doomed, noble drunkard who dies for the woman he cannot have. A guillotine, a last-minute switch, a tear-jerking final line. And all of that is in the book. But if you think A Tale of Two Cities is a story about love and sacrifice, you have mistaken the ending for the argument. The real subject of this novel is something colder and far more frightening, a thing Dickens saw happening in history and feared could happen again, anywhere. The subject is this: revolutions devour their own. Here is why that changes everything. Start with the thesis hidden in that famous opening. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. Notice the structure. Every clause is doubled and inverted. Best and worst. Wisdom and foolishness. Light and darkness. Dickens is not being indecisive. He is telling you that this entire book is built on doubling on pairs that mirror each other until you can no longer tell them apart. Two cities. Two men who look alike. Two women. Oppressor and avenger. The sentence is not describing the French Revolution. It is describing the terrible symmetry the book is about to reveal. But what exactly gets mirrored? The answer is cruelty. And to understand it, you have to see how the terror is born. The aristocracy in this novel is not merely unjust, it is monstrous in a casual, bored way. The Marquis Evrémonde runs his carriage over a child in the street and is annoyed only by the delay. He tosses a coin from the window as compensation, as if the boy were a stone chipping his paint. His family, we learn, has for generations used and destroyed the poor as a matter of habit, including the atrocity that will drive the entire plot. This is the machine of oppression. It grinds people into fuel. And Dickens wants you to understand that the revolution does not appear from nowhere. It is grown, deliberately, in the soil of exactly this cruelty. Which raises the question that the whole book turns on. The question is, what happens to the people who are ground up? And Dickens's answer is the most disturbing thing in the novel. They become the machine. The oppressed do not replace cruelty with justice. They replace one set of operators with another. Watch what happens to the wine shop in Saint Antoine. Early in the book, a cask of red wine shatters in the street, and the starving poor fall on it, scooping the wine from the gutter with their hands, staining their mouths red. It is one of the most famous images Dickens ever wrote, and it is not decoration. That red stain is a rehearsal. Dickens tells you outright, the time would come when that same street would run with a different red. The wine is blood foreshadowed. And the woman standing over it, watching, is the book's dark heart. Her name is Madame Defarges, and she is one of the great creations in all of literature, precisely because she is a mirror. She sits in the wine shop and she knits. Constantly, silently, she knits. And into the stitches she is encoding a register, the names of the aristocrats and their servants who are to die when the day comes. She is keeping a ledger of revenge. Now here is the thing Dickens wants you to feel. Madame Defarges has every reason. Her family was destroyed by the Evrémondes, the same atrocity at the root of the plot. She is a victim. Her grief is real and earned. And yet, as the revolution triumphs and the guillotine begins its work, she does not stop at the guilty. She wants the wife. She wants the child. She wants to erase the entire bloodline, the innocent along with the cruel. And in that moment, she stops being the opposite of the Marquis Evrémonde. She becomes him. That is the argument at the center of this book, and it is why the doubling matters. Oppression and vengeance are not enemies. They're the same machine, running the same program, changed only in who sits at the controls. The Marquis erased the poor without a thought. Madame Defarges would erase the aristocrat's innocent child without a thought. The knitting needles and the carriage wheels are the same instrument. Dickens shows us a revolution that began as justice and curdled into something indistinguishable from what it overthrew, a court where the accused are guilty by blood, where the mob cheers the falling blade, where liberty becomes a word screamed over a scaffold. And he had a model for this vision, one he had read obsessively. Here is the first thing you probably didn't know. The entire historical spine of this novel comes from another book, Thomas Carlyle's The French Revolution, published in 1837. Dickens revered it. He claimed to have read it hundreds of times, and he wrote to Carlyle asking to borrow the very books Carlyle had used as sources. Carlyle reportedly sent him 2 cartloads. So when you read Dickens describing the frenzy of the mob, the grindstone, the sea of red caps surging through Paris, you are reading a novelist channeling a historian he treated almost as scripture. This is not a fantasy of revolution. It is a warning built on careful, obsessive study of the real thing. But there is a second origin story, and this one is about a man. Because if the revolution came from Carlyle, the soul of the book came from a stage. In 1857, Dickens acted in a play by his friend Wilkie Collins called The Frozen Deep. Dickens played a man who nurses a hopeless, secret love for a woman and who ultimately sacrifices his own life to save the man she actually loves. Dickens threw himself into the role with famous intensity, and out of that performance grew a character. His name is Sidney Carton, a brilliant, wasted, self-loathing barrister who drinks his gifts away and believes his life is worthless. He loves Lucy Manette, who loves and marries another man, a man who, by a twist of fate, happens to look almost exactly like Carton. 2 men, 1 face. The doubling again. And this is where Dickens offers his answer to the machine. Because everything I've described, the cruelty, the vengeance, the ledger of the dead, is a closed loop. Blood answers blood. The oppressed become the oppressor. The needles keep knitting names. How, in a world like that, does the cycle ever break? Dickens's answer is not political. It is not a better system, a wiser mob, a fairer court. His answer is a single private act of love. When Lucy's husband is condemned to the guillotine by Madame Defarges' ledger, Sidney Carton, who looks just like him, walks into the prison, drugs him, trades clothes, and takes his place at the blade. The wasted man dies so the loved man may live. And notice what this does structurally. Vengeance is a public machine that consumes bloodlines. Carton's sacrifice is private, chosen, redemptive. It is the one thing in the entire novel that gives instead of takes. It is, quite literally, the opposite of the ledger. Which brings us to the last line, the resolution to the thesis buried in the first. It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. Read it against the opening now. The first sentence gave us doubling as horror, best and worst, wisdom and folly, oppressor and avenger, forever mirroring. The last sentence gives us doubling as grace. 2 men, 1 face, and the worthless one chooses to become the beloved one's salvation. The book opens with a paradox that describes a machine of endless mirrored violence. It closes with a paradox that describes the one act capable of stepping outside that machine. The structure of the novel is the argument of the novel. Dickens answers his own first sentence with his last. And here is the third thing you didn't know, which tells you how much was riding on all of this. A Tale of Two Cities was not just another Dickens novel. He wrote it to launch a brand new magazine, his own journal, all the year round, and he serialized the story across its first issues to draw readers in. He was betting his reputation and his business on it. It worked. The novel became not only a success in his lifetime, but, by many counts, one of the best-selling novels ever written in the English language, tens of millions of copies. The most quoted first line and the most quoted last line in English fiction sit inside the same book. That is not an accident. That is a writer who knew that the frame best and worst, better and better, was the whole point. So why does any of this matter now, more than a century and a half later? Because the machine Dickens diagnosed did not stay in 1789. Look at how movements built on real, justified grievance can slide into their own kind of cruelty, how the language of liberation can end up sorting people by their bloodline, their group, their inherited guilt. Look at mob justice online, the public ledger of names to be punished, the crowd that cheers the fall and does not ask whether the accused is the guilty one or merely the nearest one. Look at how the oppressed, handed power, can build a court that looks disturbingly like the one they tore down. Dickens is not telling us that revolution is wrong, or that the aristocrats deserved their power. He is telling us something harder, that righteous anger, unchecked, becomes the very thing it hated. That vengeance is not the opposite of oppression. It is oppression wearing a red cap. And his warning comes with a demand. If the ledger of revenge is a machine that only changes operators, then the way out is never systemic, it is personal. It is the choice of one human being to break the loop by giving instead of taking, by love instead of blood. That is why Carton's death is the moral climax and not just the plots. Dickens is arguing that the only force that ever truly ends a cycle of vengeance is a private act of self-sacrificing love, the one move the machine cannot compute. It's not a comfortable answer. It doesn't scale. It won't reform a court or feed the poor. But it is the only thing in the book that steps outside the mirror. So the next time someone quotes that famous opening as a bit of clever wordplay, you'll know better. It was never a flourish. It was Dickens, at the height of his powers, warning us about the machine we keep rebuilding and pointing, quietly, at the one thing that breaks it. If this changed how you think about A Tale of Two Cities, subscribe. We break down the most important books ever written, one argument at a time. New video every week. And if this was worth 10 minutes of your life, hit like. It helps the channel more than you think.